Pastor Doug. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and you?
Good. I'm good. Thank you.
We're here for another podcast of our, are they called podcasts? Something. Video Bible study. This time Elijah and Elisha.
Yeah, and passing on the mantle of faith. And this story is found in the Old Testament. We're actually looking at a couple different places. We're mostly looking at 2 Kings chapter 2, 1 through 15, but also a little bit of 1 Kings 19.
Yeah. First and 2 Kings are really one book, and the gal that kind of wrote some of the material that we are keen on today put it nicely. It probably didn't all fit on one scroll, so they had to break it up into 1 and 2 Kings. So a little bit of trivia there.
Yeah.
To start with, but what are the goals? What are the objectives?
So for this rotation, we're going to first make sure that kids can find the story in the Old Testament and kind of put it in that chronology again, and then be able to tell the story of Elijah and Elisha in their own words. Discuss the relationship between Elijah and Elisha as teacher and disciple. Explore the meaning of Elijah's request for a double portion of Elijah's spirit, and the meaning behind Elijah's passing on of the mantle, his mantle, to Elisha. And then discuss ways that they learn from their parents and their teachers, and they pick up that mantle. And what are they doing with their mantle? And how do they share that with other people? And then to learn the memory verse, which is 2 Kings 2:9b. Please let me inherit a double portion of your spirit. And then one from Psalms, also Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God.
One of my favorite psalm passages, because often I need to use that. Be still, know that I am God.
Me too.
Wonderful. Well, I suppose you might need to start with what's a mantle.
Sure.
What is a mantle?
A cloak.
It's a cloak, an outer garment. Yeah,
not your fireplace
mantle. No.
Right.
No.
So making sure that kids understand
what a mantle is. That's right.
Yeah.
That's good.
Big mantle.
Good.
Great.
Well, a little of the history, right? Right after the reign of King David and Solomon, those were kind of the wonderful years, the salad days, as it were, of Israel. As she puts here, things started to unravel, and Israel really split off into two different kingdoms: the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, where Samaria was the capital. And you hear about in the New Testament the Samaritans and the Israelites, who were kind of South Israel, for lack of a better term, in Judah and Jerusalem. They really started to become two different kinds of people. Started worshiping other gods, Baals, and some of the other gods that were in those areas, and really sort of strayed from God.
So idol worship. In fact, all of the kings in the northern region had done evil in the eyes of God, and the southern kingdom, and then they were overtaken by the Assyrians, and the southern kingdom lasted a little bit longer. And
so the Babylonians came in and took them over at like 500-ish BC.
Yeah.
And
Elijah comes in as a prophet to the northern kingdom, kings, with King Ahab, who happened to be one of the worst kings, the meanest kings.
With a name like Ahab, I mean, how can you not be a bad king?
I don't know. Yeah. And he married Jezebel, who was not a nice influence for him either. And the two of them really promoted idol worship of Baal.
Yeah.
And Baal was thought to be the god of fertility and weather.
Yes.
And so they would pray to him for crops and good weather. And Elijah ended up coming to King Ahab and saying, hey, there's going to be drought for 3 years. So it was a direct confrontation to this idol worship.
This god of, yeah.
Right. And he had several encounters, and each time he'd have to go into hiding.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when prophets would come and talk to kings, it would go well. They would turn around. They would turn their ways back to God, and other times not so much. And it kind of continues that pattern that's happened in the Old Testament of people forgetting and turning away from God and then being brought back to God. There's kind of that cycle that's going on, and it's happening here also. Yeah, one of the ups and downs of the history of the people of Israel, and I know one of the lessons in the end, not to jump to the end, but is that it's just one of those places where you see God does not give up. Even when the people have strayed far and wide, how God continues to have faith in God's creation and just doesn't give up on us. I know that would be a lesson that. Well, it's one of the key points of the Book of Kings is that it was written during the Babylonian exile, and it reminds people how they had turned away from God, but also gives them that hope that God is there and He will keep His promises. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and too, I know one of the distinctions you want to make in this rotation is talking about the difference between a disciple and a prophet, right? Mm-hmm. And a prophet, which Elijah was God's prophet, someone who speaks for God, who actually would speak the word of God to the king usually, or to God's people to try to turn them around and have them change their evil ways. But a disciple, as we know from Jesus' disciples, were followers of a teacher or a prophet. In this case, Elisha was the disciple of Elijah. Mm-hmm. Elijah was a prophet speaking for God. Elisha then followed Elijah. I got to make sure I get the right one right. Elijah, and but then in the end, when he passes the mantle, then he becomes really God's prophet. He takes the mantle, takes the place of, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, or continues on the ministry in a little different way, but continues on the ministry of Elijah. Right. So one of the things that we'll be working on with kids is this laying down of the foundation. And Elijah ended up having to fight a lot of battles, especially with King Ahab and his son, and really promoting God. And so one of the famous ones was at Mount Carmel when he challenged all of the prophets of Baal, and they had a big ceremony where the prophets of Baal were trying to get Baal to burn up their offering, and big pile of wood with sacrifices on it, and calling on Baal to basically light the fire. And after a bit of a failure, Elijah had the same challenge, a big bonfire pile of wood, and he tells the priests of Baal to take water and basically soak the wood with water three times. Three different times. Like a little moat around it. There was so much water, and this was during this drought. Yeah, this 3-year drought that was going on. So it was a big deal that they were putting water. Using the water. Yeah. And then of course, what happens when Elijah calls on God to basically light the sacrificial fire. Not only lights the fire, but it burns up all Baal's prophets that are standing around as well. And so that's one of those times when he had to go into hiding because the king Ahab and Jezebel were so ticked off that all their priests got torched into sacrificial fire in this challenge that once again they're looking to kill Elijah. Yeah, and so one of the things that we learn is that even through these challenges, God is with Elijah and takes care of him. So when he's in hiding and he needs food, he's given food with the ravens. He's given water. He met with this widow and his son, who's given more food in a miraculous way. And when he was exhausted, that's when God tells him, "Hey, you need to go find Elijah." And it's when he's hiding in this crevice in this cave, and God's like, hey, what are you doing here? And God comes to him in this still small voice, not in the wind or the rushing weather, but in the still small voice, which is where our memory verse comes from. Be still and know that I am God.
I kind of like Elijah too. She doesn't cover it in here really, but Elijah is one of those prophets that's kind of overly melodramatic from time to time. Maybe not overly melodramatic, because he's going through a lot, right? I mean, they're out to kill him, and he's all alone, and he's hiding in the desert, and he has no food to eat or water to drink, and but he's one of those prophets that'll often say, "Oh, that I would just lay down and die," and of course, God then comes to him and helps him out. But he really is put through the test sometimes. I mean, where it probably would be easier just to lay down and die rather than get up and go to this place I'm sending you so that you can speak my words to the people.
So God sends Elijah to go find Elisha, and Elisha is in the fields plowing, and Elijah walks up to him and says, hey, come and follow me, and Elisha does. And the way that that's done is Elijah takes off his mantle and puts it on to Elisha. So Elisha knew that was this big symbolic thing that, hey, I need to pay attention to this. And so he did, and he followed Elijah for 10 years. They were together. And then we come to the famous story of Elijah going up to heaven in the chariot of fire.
Wind and fire.
Right. So there are a whole bunch of prophets following along with them, and Elijah is saying, no, stay here, and Elisha is saying, no,
I will follow you wherever you go.
3 times. And the third time they are separated from the other prophets who are kind of watching to see what's going to happen by Elijah taking his mantle, kind of like Moses took his staff, but his mantle, and touches the Jordan River, and the two go across
the parting of the sea,
right?
Or the Jordan River, anyway.
Right. They're separated from all of the other prophets by this action, and then it's while they're over there, and Elisha's kind of ministering to Elijah, and they're talking, and he says, hey, give me a double portion of your spirit. May I please have a double portion of your spirit? So what is that? What's going on there? I mean, I know about the inheritance.
Sounds like he's being greedy, right? Actually, the inheritance, you hit the nail on the head there. Actually, it was like the oldest son received a double portion of the inheritance of the family.
So 2/3.
2/3, yeah. So if there's 2 of them, he'd get 2/3. The younger son would get 1/3. And it was because it was the older son's responsibility to carry on the family business, the family name, take care of the wives and the children, and whatever the family dynamic was. It was really up to the oldest son to take care of all that stuff. And so they would receive a double portion of the inheritance. And so what Elisha is asking for here is really a spiritual inheritance, and which would mean symbolically he would then be the one responsible to take care of the ministry that Elijah had started.
Okay, and so he's asking for this spiritual inheritance, and Elijah recognizes that it's not his to give, and says, okay, it's God's to give. If you see me go up to heaven, then you'll know that it's been granted to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the horse and chariot and fire come in the clouds and the fire, and it's a wonderful dramatic scene. And there's even beautiful paintings all over of this scene of Elijah going up into heaven, and Elisha tearing his garments. That's the way they appropriately grieved back then, as Elijah went off up into heaven. And Elisha indeed receives the inheritance of the Spirit, and
Elijah's mantle.
And Elijah's mantle, yeah. thing that started it all with him out in that field, and even immediately to show that he really did receive that blessing, that inheritance, he goes back to the Jordan River and touches the mantle, and it parts the water, and he walks back through on dry land in front of all the other prophets that are there as well.
And then Elijah's ministry continues, and it has just a different tack than Elijah's, because Elijah has laid this foundation for this ministry. Then Elisha was blessed to continue it in more of a
kind of reconciling, healing, just really to try to show God's people that God indeed hasn't given up on them, still loves them and cares for them, encouraging them to work together to be people of God.
And that message of hope that God is always there and with us and hasn't forgotten about us. So,
well, obviously it's a rich story. We could go on and on. There's a lot of fun details and things, but what are some of the points you're going to be doing?
With the kids in the kitchen,
my favorite part of the rotation always,
we'll be baking pie this time.
Nice. 2
different kinds of pie, and one with a crust, which is the foundation, and one without the crust, and then making that comparison of and looking at ministries in our congregation that lay the foundation for ministry to continue.
Yeah.
And how do we continue that ministry then too?
Yeah,
so
it's really our baptismal promise. We promise to place into our children's hands the Bible and teach them the Creed and the 10 Commandments, to continue to bring them and ourselves to God's holy house, to worship together, and to to really be with people every step of the way, from their baptisms to their weddings and everything else along the way, even as we celebrate people's lives and send them off into the next life at their death. It's really what we're called to do. So sorry, I sidetracked.
No.
Back to the point.
All good. In our art workshop, it's going to be more of a textile. We're really excited about this. We're going to be making a prayer wheel and talking with the people that do our prayer shawl ministry, and how those prayers are said as those shawls are being made, and then they're blessed and given on to people. And we're going to be weaving this prayer wheel that will fill with prayer, and we're excited. It's going to be really cool.
Prayer, very foundational.
Yep.
Absolutely.
In our movie workshop, we'll be watching the movie of Elijah and Elisha, and then talking more about that, passing on the mantle of faith and the ministry of those 2 prophets, and what prophets are. And then in our games workshop, we'll be doing more, putting the bits and pieces of the story together and the chronology of the story together, and doing a fun question-answer game called Guess and Know that kids like. So
kind of set the stage and put all the pieces. Wonderful. Well, again, sounds like a wonderful rotation, and
fun. Lots of good learning.
Yes. Yeah. Have fun with that, and we'll see you in church.
Yes, and Sunday school.